caught a mistake in your crochet and thought, well, I guess I'm frogging the entire thing and starting over? I've been there, but don't do it. In this video, I want to share some insanely easy fixes for the most common crochet mistakes without starting over. Common mistake number 1, you missed a stitch in a previous row or round. This one is really common, so don't beat yourself up if it happens to you. Whether you've been crocheting for a long time like me or you're just starting out, I still occasionally will miss a stitch in a previous row or round. It's just so easy to do. I typically like to do other things while I crochet, and that means I don't always give my project 100% of my attention. Now, if I know this missed stitch won't mess up the stitch pattern later on down the line, then I'll usually sort of work around and fix it without having to rip back to that point in the project. So let's say this mistake or this thing happened somewhere in the middle of a row, and you have kind of a gap or an opening as a result. One quick and easy way that you can conceal this is to use a scrap piece of yarn and just kind of weave the two stitches in together. Depending on how open and airy your stitches are for the gauge and the project that you're working with, you can very easily conceal this open gap by just pulling the two stitches together. Now, is it a perfect fix? No. Is it like the right way to fix it? No. But you know, the right way to fix something is what works for you at the time. So if you can't rip back to that mistake or that missed stitch, then this might be a subtle way that you can help conceal that little mistake without wasting the time to redo what you've already crocheted. Here's a really common mistake. You added a stitch somewhere within the work or somewhere at the edge of the work. This is really common, actually. Again, it doesn't matter your skill level or how long you've been crocheting. It's really easy to get distracted and crochet or add a stitch where we weren't supposed to or we didn't mean to. It's very common for beginners too. So if you're finding that this is the case for you, don't beat yourself up. It's just all part of the learning process. So if it's just one stitch that you've added along the edge, you could, frog back to that stitch and undo it and continue on in the correct way, we'll say. But if you don't have time or you don't have the desire to frog back an entire row of your project, then you could potentially just ignore that stitch altogether. Now, whenever you add just one stitch in a row, if you're working with a specific multiple, that can make a difference. You'll have one extra stitch and therefore your stitch pattern could be off in the subsequent rows. But if you know that you don't have a stitch multiple, or you feel comfortable enough with the stitch pattern that you can sort of work around this extra stitch, it's always an option. Now, if you add an extra stitch somewhere in the middle of a work, or let's say you make a stitch where you weren't supposed to make a stitch, in some stitch patterns, you can't even tell. A lot of more intricate stitch patterns that may be interesting to look at, just have a lot more going on visually. Sometimes having a stitch in the wrong place or an extra stitch isn't even noticeable to somebody other than you. A mistake always stands out like a sore thumb to us as we're crocheting it, but a lot of times you'll be the only one that can notice it. But of course, the option still stands. You can rip back to that stitch and take it out and redo everything. Or if you're comfortable working with your multiple and your stitch pattern and making some adjustments, you could potentially just leave that stitch in place. So while the perfectionist in me is crying a little bit to say that you can leave a mistake in your work, the practical side of me says you can leave a mistake in your work. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to make or break your project, and you'll probably be the only person who ever notices it. Another really common mistake that you might run into happens at the very beginning of your project when you're working in your foundation chain. Now, this one doesn't necessarily apply to pieces that are crocheted flat back and forth because you're not twisting your chain necessarily. I guess you could twist your chain, but it wouldn't be nearly as noticeable or as impactful as if you twist your turning chain when you're joining in the round. So let's say you're working on a project like these beginner leg warmers. They start with a chain. You'll join to form a ring, and then you'll work a really simple pattern that basically works up the length of the leg warmers. So the instructions say pretty clearly that you should avoid twisting your turning chain, or not your turning chain, but twisting your foundation chain. There we go. Words are working today. When you're crocheting around your foundation chain, you'll get to the very end, and that's where that little twist will take place. If this happens to you and you feel like you can frog it and start over, then by all means, frog it and start over. A small round like this doesn't take a lot of extra time. But let's say you're working on a bigger piece, maybe a piece of a garment or something like that, and you've got a lot more stitches and time involved. Well, if you find out that your foundation chain is twisted, you can carry the twist all the way to the end. So make sure the turning chain isn't twisted anywhere throughout except the last one. And let's say you have been crocheting into the back bump of the chain throughout the entire foundation chain. Well, on the last stitch, because this one is twisted, you'll have to work it in just a slightly different place. And while the stitch is crocheted in a slightly different place, and it might look ever so slightly different on the bottom of that chain, you don't have the twist in the stitch. Rather, the twist is in the chain, and the chain is a little bit easier and smaller to conceal, so you don't notice that twist nearly as much. Another really common mistake that might happen with your foundation chain at the start of your project, and this one's common for blankets. I don't know what it is about making like hundreds of chains at once and having to count and keep track of all of them at once, but it's so easy to add one or two too many extra foundation chains in your project when you start. And you don't know that until after you've finished crocheting that entire first row. So if you're making a blanket that has 300 chains, you've made your 300 chains, or what you think is your 300 chains, then you crochet the entire first row, and at the very end, after you've already done all of that work, you find, oh shoot, I've got one extra chain, and that throws off my entire repeat. Well, don't panic, and certainly don't undo all of that work. You can very easily undo your slip knot and undo that last chain. And even easier, you can just ignore that one chain or that two chains even altogether. You can take your tail and weave it in just like you normally would, but you're also weaving in and concealing those extra chains. Now, I honestly wish I had $1 for every time I did this next thing, because it almost happens to me weekly. Forgetting the crochet hook size that you're using for a project. Look, I'm a lady who has lots of projects going on at the same time, and I typically only use one set of crochet hooks because I really, really like them. That means I have one crochet hook in each size. And let's say I'm working on a project that uses, or I'm working on two projects that use the same hook size. It's really easy for me to remove the hook from that project, start on another one, maybe work on a few stitches on another project that I've got going on. And I like to bounce around from project to project. And then I'll come back always to that one, but that crochet hook inevitably is not attached to that project. There's a couple of things that you can do here. One, if you know that you're prone to doing this, and I actually do this quite a bit nowadays because I know how common it is for me to bounce around from project to project and forget the crochet hook size, I will take just a piece of paper and write it down in a project notebook. Or even if you didn't want to go that route, you could take a scrap piece of paper and like tie it onto your working yarn or whatever, and just write the crochet hook size on it. Take a sticky note, fold it up, stick it on that project. Just take some kind of note that lets you know you used this hook size for this project. Another really fun thing you could do if you're looking for like a quick weekend craft project and you just maybe need a break from your crochet hooks, but you still want to do something crafty, you can find some beads that have letters on them. And as you know, some crochet hook sizes coordinate to a letter. Well, you could make just like a little charm or something like that. I've actually seen these. You can find them on Etsy sometimes if you want to support those artists, and use that as a stitch marker to hold on to your working loop. And there it has the letter size of your crochet hook that you're using, so there's no guesswork or anything like that. But let's say you're in a situation where you didn't do these things. You didn't take the notes, you don't have the piece of paper or the stitch marker or whatever to tell you which crochet hook size you used. Your project isn't completely doomed. You can take an educated guess and crochet up maybe a row or several stitches and see if the tension from the hook size that you think it is matches the tension and the gauge for the rest of the project. You can tweak and go back and forth with different crochet hook sizes until you get the right one. Basically, you want to find the hook size or the hook size that it is. You can know for sure by checking your gauge and measuring the new stitches versus the old stitches, and if they match, it's pretty safe to assume that you found the right hook size. So these are just a handful of easy fixes for some common crochet mistakes that you might run into, but I know there are a ton more out there, and you all are super creative and very willing to share your experience too. So in the comments below, if you know of a crochet fix that has saved you hours, time, frustration, that has saved your projects, please leave that in the description below. I know I can learn from it. Others in the community can learn from it as well, because like I said, we're all human, we all make mistakes, and although these are a couple of common ones that come to mind for me, I know there are so many other mistakes that we make and creative ways to fix them after the fact that don't involve us ripping out our entire work. So thank you so much if you take the time to leave that in the comments. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.